We are here at WonderCon 2018. I'm joined by Mr. Stephan Franck. He just got finished with his panel about Iron Giants, a movie that he worked on. We were at his booth, and I sort of wanted to invite him on the Hall H.O. podcast. He was on, I think it was at San Diego Comic-Con, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It was, so it's nice to see you again.
Great to see you again. Thanks for having me on again.
First of all, I just want to say awesome job on the panel.
Thank you.
And I guess we'll talk about the panel really quick. We were talking a little bit earlier, and you said it was about the second time that you did it.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I noticed is that it's pretty much Q&A.
Yeah, I always feel like it's, those panels, whether it's instructional panels or just, things like behind the scene panels, I feel like people come in with a lot of questions that they've had maybe about the movie for a long time, and it's much better to just I basically give a basic setup, let people know how the movie kind of came to be and my involvement, how that came to be, and then I feel like most of what I have to say, I have the chance to say it, answering people's questions, so at least I know they're getting what they're looking for from the panel.
Mm-hmm. And for those of our audience who don't know what your involvement was in Iron Giant, could you sort of maybe summarize it briefly?
Yeah, I was one of the supervising animators on the movie, so that was like an amazing learning experience for me, and a chance to work on probably one of the, in my mind at least, one of the best animated movies that were done, in recent years. So Definitely. It was I was extremely lucky for that.
Mm-hmm. And one of the questions that I noticed in the crowd, someone asked, well, a lot of people say that it's a movie that really touched them. It's the cornerstone of, not only the childhood, but the whole family. I know that heavy metal has a big influence on you. Now, is there a movie that sort of has that effect that Iron Giant has for them? Other than maybe heavy metal, but maybe something else?
Oh, for me, that has this effect on me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm going to say the movie that I saw as a kid that captured my imagination maybe the most, more than anything else, was Blade Runner.
Oh, Blade Runner. Yeah. Okay, right. Yeah. That's a good one.
I always loved noir, as you know, from Silver, and always loved sci-fi and Philip K. Dick and so like. And Ridley Scott's one of my favorite directors anyway. So like that movie captured my imagination really intensely.
Mm-hmm. There's a movement now. I know that in the animation world, you talked about in the panel that you guys were sort of learning as you go. There's one part where like the technical and then the sort of artistic were sort of melding together.
Yes.
You want to touch on that a little bit?
On Iron Giants?
Yeah.
It was very interesting because that's a movie that was done in the late 90s, right? So really CG as a tool for feature animation was really just sort of starting. I mean, Toy Story had come out and stuff, but it was just Pixar, and so we had a lot of people who knew CG from the technical side, so they knew the tools really well, but they didn't necessarily understand film language or animation and stuff like that as well as we did, but at the same time, we didn't know the tools at all. So like very quickly, the two groups started working closely together, and everybody learned from everybody, and it was a really exciting time,
Yeah. Another important point that I thought about your panel was I was reminded about a podcast or an interview that Neil deGrasse Tyson was on, and he was talking about, when you're younger, kids, they're experimenting, and you shouldn't prohibit that.
Yes.
Even if they're banging on pots and pans, and you
could grow up to be the greatest drummer in the world.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned something about your light table when you were in the panel. About how you use the coffee table?
Yeah, when I was 6 years old, I stole the coffee table from the living room and dragged it up to my room to use as a light table to animate,
Yeah, so I thought that was really
an
important point.
The important thing about that was that my dad, instead of saying like many dads, like, what are you doing? Bring this back to the living room, where I'm going to put my beer on, what I mean? No, he was like, well, you're all set up to do your work now, and I think if you can do that to for your kids, which is to recognize that maybe they have some work that defines them and that they have to do, and that is to be respected, that it's not a hobby or an outlet or a phase, it's just their work, and they're just that type of vocational people who have work to do from the moment they were born. Mm-hmm. You have to encourage it,
Is there anything that wasn't asked at the panel that you wish they would have asked?
No, I think it was a really great panel. I really enjoyed that. It was really about a lot of had to do with emotions and honesty, and, which I think at the end of the day is the most important thing, because that's everything else is just a means to that end, you know. So I think it was very important. Sometimes in panels, people are more interested in the depending on if depending on where you would do something like this. Sometimes the questions get more technical and more kind of inside baseball, and that's great too. And I love to share it. But if it's a more general audience and they're really focused on the truth and honesty and emotional resonance of the movie, this is very important to me.
If the movie was to be made now, like what are some of the differences you might expect? You could maybe cover the technical aspect, or maybe there's some parts of the story that may be different.
Well, I mean, it's really, there's like two ways to take that question, right? Like the question is like, if just the same artist had the tools of today to do it, would they do it any different? And probably no. Like I don't, I mean, like specifically, maybe you'd use a different program to color the drawings or whatever, but it's not,
the feeling will be the same.
Right. The question is, would the industry let you make that movie now? Right?
Okay.
Or would they want to make it live action with a CG giant? Or would they make it all CG? Or, you know what I mean? So maybe they would. Maybe you could imagine that, this movie would be made today as a full CG movie. And, I'm sure there would be a lot of artistic merits to it too. It would be a different vibe, definitely. But if we were going to do a 2D, a 2D version of the, I think that one is pretty definitive. I don't think there's any like major changes in technology that would have you approach it really differently.
Your other panel deals with sort of using your experiences in the world of cinema and translating it into the comic book.
Right.
Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
I mean, what's interesting with the Iron Giant 2 was like how rooted in the love for comics that movie was. I worked in that sequence, like the comic book reading in the barn and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The fact that Brad also was in love with the spirit and stuff like that. So, I think at the end of the day, all the art forms are sort of merging today. I mean, we are now in this pop culture event at WonderCon where it's people who, games, TV, comics, it's all one thing. You're just following these worlds and these characters across all those forms of entertainment. And I think each form has independently evolved certain tools over the years, right? Like comics have evolved certain things, like the ability, for instance, to be weird and to do things that really push the presentation without breaking the reality of it. That's something that's really in comics, and that's only now, is bleeding into cinema with the Marvel movies and all that stuff, right? But meanwhile, movies have developed this form of visual storytelling known as film language. That everybody in the world understands now as a second language, if not a first. You know what I mean?
For sure.
And if you can bring that into comics, which is kind of what I've been doing, because that is, animation and film has been my career for a long time. Then you bring a level of accessibility to new readers to your comics that maybe people, I hear it every day. I love to read comics, but I can't get into it. I'm confused. I don't know where to go. Well, put just a little bit of this, a sense of film language in your comics, and people won't even question it. So it's just like all those art forms are converging. If everyone can learn from everybody else what they do well, then I think you're getting into some really powerful forms of communication.
For sure. I guess we can maybe talk a little bit about your comic book Silver, and on that point about converging, have the fans of your Iron Giant work sort of come and accepted, or have at least taken a look at your Silver comic book, and how's the acceptance of that?
It's great. I mean, I'll tell you, what's really interesting is that I've worked on tons of movies, and some of them have made way more money than Iron Giant. Yet the Iron Giant is the one movie that people have this emotional connection, or who come out of the woodwork just specifically to tell me, hey, that movie, it means this much to me. And the only other project in 30 years that I've had the exact same sort of response from an audience is Silver.
Okay.
And I think the common link between the two is that those are two projects that were created with like a wide degree of freedom and honesty and independence. Although, you know, Iron Giant was a studio movie, but the studio didn't care, and Silver is an independent project. So the end result is that level of freedom, and I think this is why the most honest stuff is coming out, and this is why I think people are responding to those things the way they do.
Okay, awesome. I guess your comic book Silver is volume 3 right now. Do you want to sort of maybe do a little quick synopsis of each volume and then leading up to 3?
Yeah. So generally speaking, Silver is the continuation of the original Bram Stoker's Dracula universe, and it takes place 40 years later into the noir pulp era of the 1930s. And this group of con men team up with this woman who's a vampire hunter to steal precious silver from a castle full of vampires, right? Like, as people do. Like, what could go wrong, right? And so in the first volume, you really like get into this world. You meet these characters. Some of them have no ideas that there's such thing as vampires. So it's like there, through their eyes, you discover, you know, the characters meet, relationship starts to form around some, you know, this common mission at the same time with different moral ways to interact with the world. So it's full of fun, conflict, and character stuff. And it's the beginning of a big pulp adventure told with like a very modern voice. So that's cool. So that's volume 1. And then at the end of volume 1, they go off on the adventure, and that's, you know, volume 2. And now we're getting into like the world building of it, you know, because they travel back to the old world, and so you get on the Orient Express, you get to Transylvania. So you really discover this world, and you see these characters kind of infiltrate the secret world of vampires. So that's super fun. And in volume 3 now, the wheel starts to come off the rail because the people, you know, in the group have their own agenda. They're broken in their own ways. So the question is, can you keep this thing together and complete the mission? Or are you going to fall apart in an environment where like you can't have any mistakes? You know?
Yeah.
So that's how the story progresses, and then all is finished and revealed and resolved in volume 4.
Can't wait for that. And I'm loving how you know, Rosalind is sort of mixed in the whole thing.
Oh, thank you. Rosalind, yeah, it's a passion project of mine. So, you know, one of our main characters and most popular character in Silver is Sledge, aka Rosalind Van Helsing. You can see in the back her face, right?
Yeah.
And so she's this amazing woman who's a vampire hunter, right? But at the same time, because she spends so much of her life you know, dealing with the dead and making sure they stay that way, she's a little bit disconnected from the living. And it's basically a book about people, you know, Silver in general is about people who are very good at what they do, but they all suck at life. And so Rosalind, this book, it's her diary as a child. So it's really interesting. So you'll see it's drawn and written as a diary.
I love the artwork.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's so amazing.
And so it's really interesting because it's seen from her point of view and told in her voice. So it's really this kind of unique combination of extreme grittiness and resilience, but also innocence. Cool. So yeah, I feel it's a very powerful. It was very powerful for me writing it and drawing it, and hopefully people receive it the same way.
Yeah, it must have been sort of like you mentioned freedom earlier, and you know, while I love the artwork and the noir feeling of Silver, it was kind of cool to see the just the randomness of Rosalind.
It's raw emotion.
Yeah. So
from fear to love to pain to resilience, it's all raw emotion.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I appreciate you taking on.
It's my pleasure.
Taking the time.
Always great talking to you.
Yeah, and I know you have a long line growing over here, so I won't keep you from them.
Thank you.
So I hope to have you on again.
Yes, anytime.
And, I can't wait for Volume 4 to come out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.